Many domestic companies have decided to grow their business into a foreign market. Let's be clear. A foreign market can be the country next door or 10,000 miles away. For example, many people believe a U.S. company expanding into Canada would find it easy as they are just right across the border. However, how many people know that within Canada there is a province where business is conducted in French, not English? The legal system is different in that province than the rest of Canada, and Canada's political, economic, and legal systems are very different than the U.S., even though we share a common border and in general communicate in the same language. Over the next few slides, we'll be presenting some of the key differences that companies need to understand when they are looking to expand their operations outside of their domestic market. Political, economic, and legal systems. These three are more interdependent and influence each other in so many ways. For example, Venezuela was a democracy that embraced capitalism for the most part. However, with the so-called election of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro as presidents of Venezuela, they have turned the country from a democracy into a quasi-totalitarian government that controls almost all aspects of the economy and one's personal life. Even the judicial system has fallen under the influence of the president. All of this in 20 years. Probably the most important system to discuss is political, as it really drives the other two. Collectivism views individual rights take a back seat to the rights of society as a whole. This political system does not exist today in the truest sense, but parts of the concept exist in the next system. Totalitarianism. Probably the worst type of political system to live under. All aspects of one's life is controlled by the central government. Any deviation is dealt with swiftly and usually in a harsh manner. There are several different forms of totalitarianism in existence in today's world. However, they have one thing in common. The rights of individuals are sharply curtailed and most freedoms are denied. Socialism has two main parts: communism and social democracy. First, communism comes from the Latin word communis, common, universal, and is a philosophical, social, political, and economic ideology and movement whose ultimate goal is the establishment of a communist society, which is the socio-economic order structured upon the ideas of common ownership of the means of production and the absence of social classes, money, and state. Today, there are very few countries who can say they are communist in the truest form. Social democracy is described as advocating economic and social interventions to promote social justice within the framework of a liberal, democratic environment and a capitalist-oriented mixed economy. There are many Western democracies who can be viewed as being a social democratic democracy. Pretty self-explanatory, as we live this on a daily basis. However, as of today, there are movements within the U.S. government to move the country toward a more socialistic leaning. This can only be accomplished through the ballot box by electing members of House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency who hold these views. A command economy is a system where the government, rather than the free market, determines what goods should be produced, how much should be produced, and the price at which the goods are offered for sale. It also determines investments and incomes. One of the key aspects of a command economy, innovation rarely happens, as creativity is not supported or allowed by the central government. Just imagine if the U.S. truly operated as a command economy. There would be no iPhone, Uber, Netflix, etc. Command economies today would be like North Korea and Cuba. A market economy is an economic system in which economic decisions and the pricing of goods and services are guided by the interactions of the country's individual citizens and businesses. In a market economy, most economic decision making is done through the voluntary transactions according to the laws of supply and demand. A market economy gives entrepreneurs the freedom to pursue profit by creating outputs that are more valuable than the inputs they use up, and free to fail and go out of business if they do not. While many view the U.S. as being a market economy, the reality is the U.S. has moved to be more of a mixed economy. A mixed economy means that part of the economy is left to the free market, and part of it is managed by the government. Mixed economies start from the basis of allowing private enterprise to run most businesses. Then the governments intervene in certain areas of the economy, such as providing public health services like health, education, waste management, and the regulation of private businesses like legal right to private property and abuse of monopoly power. In reality, most economies are mixed, with varying degrees of state intervention. In the U.S., the Post Office and Amtrak are two examples of something that the free market could control, but the government controls instead. Most recently, during the financial crisis of 2008, the U.S. government took significant ownership stakes in companies deemed essential by the U.S. government. The U.S. ownership remained until such time it was decided to exit those companies because they were financially stable. Finally, legal systems is the third leg of the stool that drives a country. The legal system of a country refers to the rules, laws that regulate behavior, along with the processes by which the laws are enforced and through which redress for grievances is attained. Common law is the body of unwritten laws based on legal precedents established by the courts. Common law influences the decision-making process in unusual cases where the outcome cannot be determined based on existing statutes or written rules of law. The U.S. common law system evolved from a British tradition that spread to North America during the 17th and 18th century colonial period. Common law is also practiced in Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, India, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. The important things to remember are the following. 1. Common law, also known as case law, is a body of unwritten laws based on legal precedents established by the courts. 2. Common law draws from the institutionalized opinions and interpretations from judicial authorities and public juries. And 3. Common law sometimes proves the inspiration for new legislation to be enacted. A body of rules that delineate private rights and remedies and govern disputes between individuals in such areas as contracts, property, and family law, which is distinct from criminal or public law. This is known as civil law. Civil law systems trace their roots to ancient Rome and are governed by doctrines developed and compiled by legal scholars over the years. Legislators and administrators in civil law countries tend to fashion a code by which all legal controversies are decided. Theocracy is a form of government which refers not to civil development of law, but to the interpretation of the will of God as set out in religious scripture and authorities. The law in a theocracy must be consistent with the religious text the ruling religion abides by. In theocracy, the courts are usually presided over by religious officials who are taken as more versant in the applicable legal text. Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Vatican are examples of theocratic countries. We have briefly discussed some of the differences in national political, economic, and legal systems, highlighting the ways in which managers in global settings need to be sensitive to these differences. Political differences are described along two dimensions: collective and individualist, and democratic and totalitarian. Economic systems are explored in terms of market characteristics, market economies, command economies, mixed economies. And legal systems are discussed in terms of the protections they offer for businesses, intellectual property, product safety, liability, and contracts. Here are two countries in contrast. Zimbabwe has endured widespread political and economic corruption since gaining its independence from Britain in 1980. Once considered the jewel of Africa, the country is now one of the most corrupt in the world, has an unemployment rate of 80% and a skyrocketing rate of inflation. On the other hand, the political and economic policies in Vietnam since the reunification of the country have fueled economic growth in the country. Being aware of the differences will help to ensure that global investment opportunities are financially successful.